Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee and Football, presented by Rick Vavro and Austin Underground. I'm your host, Blake Monroe, where I'm joined each and every morning by Bobby Burton and CJ Vogel. And guys, what a whirlwind of a 24 hours. I mean, it started with Pete Carroll, then Nick Saban, Bill Belichick, and then, of course, thrown in there was Bo Davis. I mean, just wild. What's y'all's thoughts now that you've gotten to sleep on it about the last 24 hours?
My thought is that there are macro implications and micro implications. It runs the gamut today. That's for sure. You look at the situation right now. I think that a lot of Texas fans, hey, is Steve Sarkisian a candidate at Alabama or not? We cannot confirm either way at this point in time. Joel Klatt, Fox football analyst, put out a list yesterday that included Sark at the top of his list, and then included Dan Lanning and Kalen DeBoer. Klatt said that he did not expect Sark to take the job. I wouldn't expect Sark to take the job either, but hey, you never know in this day and age what's going on, the discussions behind the scenes. I do know that Sark had a great time in Tuscaloosa, is very appreciative of his time in Tuscaloosa. I don't necessarily think that means he goes back to Tuscaloosa. That's number one. Nor am I sure that they're going to make a phone call to Sark A1. I mean, it could be other people involved here. It's a little early to be thinking that this is done, right? So there's that piece. Then you have the idea that Pete Carroll was Sark's other main mentor in college football coaching, and he is out in Seattle. And then I wake up this morning at 5:30 a.m. or 6 a.m. and Bill Belichick's gone. So truly the best college football coach of the last 15 years, the best NFL head coach of the last 20 years, and the best coach that's done it at both places, college and pro, are all gone within a matter of 24 hours. That's just an amazing amount of upset, turmoil. Dan Quinn, I'm told, is the leader right now to get the Washington job. By the way, if you're a Cowboys fan, we'll see if that turns out. But Blake, you had the prospects or the leaderboard, so to speak, from other schools, or excuse me, from the Las Vegas line yesterday. What is up with the Las Vegas line right now as it relates to this coaching change at Alabama? Has Sark's name gone up the list? Is it still down the list? Because yesterday it was Dan Lanning, Dabo Swinney, and Kalen DeBoer as the top three. Is Sark moved up that board? Is there still a board, or do they think they already have a guy? What's going on right now?
So it appears as of about midnight last night, Dan Lanning was 3-1. However, I will say Oregon insiders are very adamant that Lanning is not going anywhere. So remember that. Dabo Swinney, 4-1. Lane Kiffin, 5-1. Deion Sanders, 6-1. DeBoer, 6-1. Pat Shurmur, 9-1. Urban Meyer, 10-1. Billy Napier, of all people, 14-1. Derek Dooley, 14-1, and Mike Norvell, 16-1 now. And he was up the list, when that news first broke originally.
Pat Shurmur is an old. I first met Pat Shurmur when he was an assistant at Michigan State under Nick Saban. So that goes back 25 years ago when I was running through different areas of recruiting. I went to go see TJ Duckett on that trip. If I don't know if you remember him, but he was out of Kalamazoo, Michigan. I made a trip by the Michigan State coach's office and met those guys. That's just crazy to me. Pat Shurmur's an interesting name kind of coming up there. He would definitely have the pro background as part of his MO, which is one of the things that Saban brought to Alabama and made it very, very valuable.
Yeah. So I do think it's interesting that Norvell has fallen off. Had not seen any odds for Sarkisian. So That's obviously, that's not the gospel, but it is good news for Texas fans because, oftentimes these odds are a good, telltale of where everything is because people in Vegas are not stupid. They're the ones that set the odds for a reason. But I don't know. I was actually kind of, trying to get a feel for what Bama fans are wanting, and they do not want Dabo. And they were even chanting it last night, I believe, at the Bama game, no Dabo, or, we don't want Dabo. So I can't remember what the chant was, but it seems like they would not be happy there in Tuscaloosa if they got Dabo, at least from a fan perspective. Now, a lot of people have been bringing up Lane Kiffin, and I kind of feel like that's a good match there. I mean, Lane,
he got fired. Saban fired him the week of a national championship game. Do they not remember that?
Hey, but he's fun on Twitter.
Watched the national championship game in Boca Raton from a tilted kilt or whatever it's called. I mean, that I don't know if people remember that. I think Mike Norvell, Steve Sarkisian, Kalen DeBoer, those are the names that people are going to look for more so than Lane Kiffin. I could be wrong. What's interesting is all of those guys, by the way, offensive coaches, whereas Nick Saban was a defensive coach. So Dan Lanning is that defensive coach, right? That would fit that MO for Alabama. So keep that in mind. Hey, you mentioned the fans. One of the coolest things I saw yesterday when we were doing our live stream, Blake and CJ, had to do with the Auburn fans and how they were reacting to the news that the GOAT was retiring. They toilet papered Toomer's corner. That's how they usually celebrate victories at Auburn. Well, apparently this is a victory because the old man Scrooge is retired, according to Auburn. The guy that cast the shadow over the Auburn football program. Look at that from last night. That's just crazy.
That's awesome.
That really is. That shows respect yet joy at the same time at news that happens elsewhere at Auburn.
Yeah, that's what makes college football great, is stuff like that right there. There's no doubt about it. All right, guys. Well, obviously we touched on Bo Davis very briefly. Is it too early to hear anything? Have y'all heard anything? What's some names, that you think may come up for the Longhorns to replace Davis?
CJ, you go first.
I mean, it's certainly a fresh wound right now. I think Texas had it in their minds that Bo Davis was going to return for the 2024 season, seemingly out of left field, as we've seen with a lot of these other news drops over the last 24 hours. Things can change pretty quickly in college football. Bo Davis opting to go to LSU, join the staff down there in Baton Rouge. Texas is now kind of in an evaluation position right now. I think a very hot name is Freddie Roach out of Alabama. That's who a lot of people are pointing to as a seamless transition down to Austin. There's a number of NFL caliber defensive line coaches out there as well. The Ole Miss defensive line coach is one that's been tossed around on Twitter as well. Frank Oakham, a number of names with ties to Texas and NFL development on the defensive line. Sarkisian has been, very quick to find out who he wants to target for assistant coaching hires, but he's not been very quick to have that news leak and get out to the public in that regard. So I'm sure he's on his short list of stringing together guys that he's hoping to get an interview with, or at least into the ear of hearing how interested they might be with Texas. But it might be a while before it gets out to public consumption at the time being.
Yeah, I've got names here that people will want to check out. I think he's also going to look at some guys on the West Coast that he's familiar with. I would put a couple names down here. Freddie Roach is certainly one of them. Not only does he have SEC experience, he has a number of ties to some of the same players Texas has been recruiting at defensive line. I think that's an important situation there. There's also familiarity not only with Steve Sarkisian, because they overlapped 1 year at Alabama, but also with Kyle Flood and Jeff Banks as well. So there's that. A.J. Milwee was on that staff too. Then there's other guys. Ed Orgeron is a name I'm going to throw out there. I know he's a former head coach at LSU as well as Ole Miss, but he did grow up as an offensive line coach, might be looking to get back into coaching. We'll see how that works out. Randall Joyner is the name at Ole Miss. He's got a lot of Texas ties. One of his big jobs was at SMU. He's a notable young recruiter We'll see if he actually, follows through with that and becomes a great recruiter over time at a bigger program. And then you have two Longhorn exes, Frank Oakham and Rod Wright. Both have some NFL pedigree in them. Both played interior defensive line at the University of Texas. They're relatively young comparatively to some of these other coaches. And then I want to add one more, and that's Ryan Nielsen. He's the former defensive coordinator at the Atlanta Falcons, but that team, that group just got blown up. He's from USC originally. Might be a guy that Texas looks at as well. So whether or not he wants to go back to pro, I don't know. But Nielsen at one point in time recruited 6 NFL players to NC State. So let that resonate. Interior defensive lineman to NC State over a 3-year period. He was a recruiting witch of sorts, the likes of Tashard Choice, essentially. Going back to one thing that you mentioned, CJ, was the surprise nature of Bo Davis's departure. He had told Texas that he was staying last week. And so that's the whole issue here, whether it's the opportunity to coach his son potentially at LSU, which isn't necessarily going to happen, by the way. LSU getting around his buyout for him, as well as an increase in pay, could be a big piece of this, or is a big piece of this as well. So a lot of things going on right now in the that juncture. The question I have, and I think Texas fans should immediately have, is what does this do with Alex January at Duncanville, DeAndre Robinson at Orlando Jones, as well as Melvin Hills at Lafayette Acadiana, and the player they've been recruiting in the portal, Jamari Caldwell, out of the University of Houston. So all of that mixed together, what does this mean for Texas going forward with the defensive tackle spot? Because now, I mean, look, people have recruited better than Bo Davis. There's no doubt that there are better recruiters than Bo Davis. What Bo Davis focused on was developing what he had, and he did a nice job of that. There's absolutely no questioning that. 4 NFL players in the last 2 years out of his defensive tackle rotation.
All right, guys. Well, plenty to talk about this morning, plenty of time to get your questions in, so please do so. At 8:30ish, we're going to have David Farenthold from the New York Times. He's going to be talking about NIL collectives and how it affects schools like Texas. And we also need to talk about Junior Day coming up. But before we do that, Bobby, I'm going to let you tell everybody out there about Rick Vavro and Austin Underground.
Yeah, absolutely. Since 2004, Austin Underground has specialized in difficult underground commercial installations for its customers. The team's engineering background gives Austin Underground the ability to perform work other firms often consider just too risky. Rick and his team offer an end-to-end client experience, including seamless communication, budgeting, staffing, and top-notch trade partners. And most importantly, they produce solid, quality work each and every time. That's Austin Underground, Rick Vavro and his team. Also, they own Texas Road. So if you're looking for road service for private or public installations, give Rick and his team a call at Austin Underground or Texas Road.
I want to thank them for sponsoring each and every Thursday right here on Onyx Football. And I mentioned Junior Day, which is now 9 days away. It takes place on January 20th. What's the latest that y'all are hearing there?
Well, this list on my end, at least, just eclipsed 50 top prospects from the 2025 and 2026 classes. And this is before, getting with Bobby and his list and some of the names that have, or I guess were added very late last night as well. So overall, I mean, a tremendous haul coming in. We talked about it being a special afternoon on the 40 acres in terms of Texas being able to capitalize on their postseason run, their top 3 finish in the entire country. Now Texas is getting a head start in the 2025 and a little bit of the 2026 classes as well. This is a time for them to really start getting this ball moving. As we've talked about, I'm looking at it now, a very talented slew of 2026 running backs. The entire 2025 target share of offensive linemen, for my money's worth, will be coming in to campus as well. There is a very impressive list, and we've talked about the linebackers, Elijah Bo Barnes, Riley Pettijohn, Jonah Williams, a very talented group right there, and obviously Anthony Williams, the Texas 2025 commit from Shadow Creek, scheduled to be on campus as well. It's shaping up to be a tremendous weekend, and one of the largest that I've seen from a Texas Steve Sarkisian event early on in the year.
I want to add this. So what are the expectations on that junior day? Somebody might ask. Well, here's a couple things to consider. Texas actually plays Baylor in basketball at 11 a.m. You can bet those guys, some of those players will make their way over to the Baylor basketball game for a half or so. They probably won't go the entire time. Okay, so that may be part of the festivities, so to speak. They'll also be showing up relatively early in the morning and then kind of sporadically throughout the day. That's another piece of what's going to happen on the 40 acres. Some guys will come in on Friday. Some guys will stay Friday and Saturday. Some will stay Saturday and Sunday because Sark will try to load this weekend up. And it'll be, even though we're saying January 20th is the junior day, that's not what reality will look like for the head football coach at the University of Texas. There will be a number of guys coming in early, staying late, et cetera. It'll be a 3-day kind of a big thing. I do want to mention this while we're at the outset here. One other piece of information as it relates to recruiting. Tomorrow, the coaches get out on the road. They're back out on the road tomorrow. Tomorrow is their annual Central Texas Day, is my understanding. And what does that mean? Last year, Sark started doing this. First day out, he went to all the Central Texas schools from Waco High, Waco University, all the way down to Cibolo Steel, Brandeis, Smithson Valley, etc. So tomorrow, it's my understanding that all of the coaches will be out in Central Texas, kind of canvassing Central Texas. So Temple, Cop Cove, Belton, all that group down into Austin Westlake, Lake Travis, LBJ, et cetera, all the way down into San Antonio area. So they're back on the road tomorrow recruiting for 2025s. A couple of schools that I think they're for sure going to get by are Waco, Connolly, and Cibolo Steel, based on just sheer numbers in the area. Those would be for sure. Westlake, et cetera, going to get visits as well.
Hey, good question here, guys, from Ryan from Shiner. He says, will Sark add a recruiter temporarily or just go without Bo?
That is a good question. Could Brandon Harris has been activated before. He's the off campus recruiting guy. He's been activated before. He could go on the road. I'm not sure if he will, though. That's a question that's we'll probably find out tomorrow. If Sark is on the road, I don't necessarily expect Brandon Harris to be on the road as well, though.
Okay, y'all. Well, I think our special guest for today is ready, so I'm going to go ahead and bring him on in. This is New York Times columnist David Farenthold. And David, how you doing this morning?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me on.
You got your coffee there. That's the way to do it, David. Hey, so you're a Houston native, is that correct?
That's right. I went to Memorial High School in Houston.
Okay, gotcha. You ended up going to Harvard for school, but you said you're a self-professed Longhorn fan at heart. Is that
That's right? Yeah, my parents went to UT, and I grew up. I mean, you guys know you have to choose a side really early, so I was a UT fan all growing up. Some of those were pretty lean years.
Yeah.
But I was a UT fan all growing up. So yes, they were my team. They've been my team forever.
I got you. Well, hey, David, thanks for joining us. You wrote a piece and did a podcast that I listened to actually about the NIL collective space. And it was really interesting. And if people haven't read it or listened to it, I suggest they do, because it had a lot of background about where all of this came from. And you gave a lot of time to an organization called Horns with Heart, which created the Pancake Factory, which you think precipitated a lot of copycats around the country.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they were one of the first people to see, in 2021, late 2021, when NIL was just a thing and people hadn't really figured out how it could be used yet. They were among the first to see, hey, yeah, this system is set up for people to, for Gatorade to pay for people's endorsements, but it doesn't have to be just Gatorade. Like, if we're a group of fans and we want to pay players, because we like them, nobody's going to stop us from doing that. And so let's use this as a way to explicitly tell people, hey, you come to Texas, you can get paid something and make the team better. Yeah, they were the first to do it, and everybody was kind of aghast at the time. But now, there's hundreds of groups doing the same thing all around the country.
You say that. What are some of the? I listened to your piece, and I think it was tremendous because I felt like it was fair. Like some people come out, and an investigative reporter often, people in the outside the media think, oh, they're poking, they're looking for something.
Yeah.
And you are. That's your job, right? Is to look for things. But it came off to me as very fair because it was not only talking about the positives that have come out of NIL, but the negatives that have come out of it. And I thought that the piece as a whole was interesting. What were your key findings in your opinion?
I would say a couple of things. First, just, in a way that to the casual fan or even the sort of less casual fan, NIL has just changed the way that players are recruited, the way they're retained. It's created, and there's good parts and bad parts of this. It's created basically like a free agent market for college athletes, well, at least for college football players. But not like a free agent market like you and I would think of as in the pros. It's basically an unregulated one because in theory this free agent market doesn't exist. By that I mean the NCAA still says, hey, you can't pay players to play their sport, and you can't pay players to come to your team. But that's the reason these collectives exist, is to pay players who have value to their team, so they'll stay on. They'll come to your school and they'll stay on the team that you like. So the players are out there. So we talked about the good and the bad of this. The good of this is the players are getting paid and in a way that's legal. And so all these guys their labor has created this giant industry that makes so much money for so many other people. I mean, Jimbo Fisher is the most latest example of people who get, there's so much money in this industry, but it's been diverted from the people whose labor and bodies are the ones that make this. So those players are getting paid now. The downside of this, I would say, put it in two categories mainly. One is that the players are having to navigate this kind of unregulated black market where there's really no way, the way that if I was a pro second baseman or a pro quarterback, I know enough about what other people are paid to know what I might be able to get. I mean, for draft picks in the NFL, it's almost down to a science. You really know you're going fourth. This is what a fourth round draft or fourth pick gets. For these players in college, there's almost none of that. The collectives, there's no repository of this information. Everybody lies. Nobody tells the truth about it. It's so hard as a reporter just to find out even the most basic details of what people get paid. So imagine you're like an 18-year-old or 20-year-old trying to navigate that. It's so hard to know what you're worth. That's one downside of it. And so people can sometimes sign for a lot less than they deserve. The other downside is that the system has a lot of it, and the Texas Collective is one of them, that basically has been built on the backs of these nonprofits, tax-exempt nonprofits. That's how I got into this. I cover nonprofits. And they're using nonprofits in a way that, yes, it benefits the players, is really not the way that nonprofits are supposed to be used. Like, it's not really a charity to pay a linebacker, even if the linebacker is glad to have the money and could use it. That's not what charity is for. And so the whole thing is now kind of on this shaky legal ground because they've done it through these charities, and the IRS, which regulates charities, has actually come out and said, hey, this isn't the way you're supposed to do it. And so an enforcement effort by them could destabilize the whole thing.
Hey,
Wait,
David, Oh, yeah. So, you did a deep dive into NIL, into collectives. I mean, you didn't just look at Texas. You looked at programs around the country. What would you say really surprised you the most when you started digging into all of this?
I would say a couple of things. One would just be the extent of it. Like, I knew that these things existed at Texas and Ohio State and Alabama and other places, but they're everywhere. They're even at some really small schools. And I would say the second thing that surprised me is just the way that, like, changing this one little piece of college sports is just, there's been a domino effect that's changing so much else. I mean, it's so hard to stop the change at this. Okay, we're going to pay players and that's it. We're not going to change anything else. That position is untenable. And so to watch the sort of cascading effects. Okay, well, if you can pay players, why can't the schools pay players? And if schools can pay players, which is what the NCAA has proposed, well, how do we stop that from creating sort of a system of super teams where there's basically 30 teams that play in kind of a miniature NFL? And if I'm Rice or Vanderbilt or, Minnesota, pick your, a big time team that's not going to be in that super league, what happens to those schools? How does that change them? So I was surprised at the degree to which this one change is causing all these sort of cascading effects across college sports.
David,
go ahead, CJ.
I was sticking on that kind of topic of which schools kind of kept, the big bucks churning. As we've seen NIL, collectives pop up at seemingly each university that competes at the Power 5 level. Has there been a surprise in which universities have been able to be as active as they were or are currently in, kind of the recruiting or portal aspect of this? Or have you thought it would be kind of more the big dogs, the Texases, the Ohio States, the Alabamas or Georgias coming in and really being able to money whip whoever would be, standing in their way?
You're right that it mainly is a way of like solidifying people who are already there. Like, I don't think you could really point to anybody in this college football playoff or even in the upper echelons of college football this year and say, oh yeah, those people are, they rocketed out of obscurity thanks to NIL. There's still a lot of other factors at play. It's still, you're probably not going to go to Vanderbilt over Alabama, even if Vanderbilt pays you a lot. But there have been, I think there's a couple of schools that are sort of like in the middle range that are at least trying to make a big spend and go up. I mean, I would count SMU as one of those. They spent, ironically, SMU, where, it was so stung by this experience in the 80s, they have really tried to level up. Ole Miss is another one. And I don't know if they're going to get there. A&M to a degree, A&M, they have a lot going on at A&M, obviously, but they have tried to build the collective that can help them level up. So I think there are some schools who sort of feel like they would be, if you rank the top 30 programs, they're like in the bottom of that top, that are trying to move up with it, but you haven't really seen it yet. I mean, in this college football playoff, we looked at the collectives behind all four of the teams. Texas has a real powerhouse, obviously. Michigan has a real powerhouse. Alabama's was like completely secretive, but we figured out that even the board members of the collective claim not to know how it works. So I don't really know what's going on there, but I'm sure there's a lot of money. And then Washington's was the one that was sort of at the lower end, but even they had raised a lot of money and used it very strategically to keep, this set of guys, Roma Dunze, Michael Penix, the guys who were sort of at the core of that team, keep them there and to keep some of those guys from graduating last year. So it's I think the main overall impact of this is going to be to sort of separate the haves and have-nots further, perhaps so far that the have-nots are like never going to be. They're going to be out of it permanently.
You mentioned not utilizing the nonprofit correctly, but they've been approved. If I'm not mistaken, these nonprofits have actually been approved by the IRS, and so they would have to go back and retroactively disapprove of them.
Right.
What is the next step in that regard from the IRS? Did you get in your reporting? Did you get any sense of where this was headed, or is it kind of just nebulous right now? And nobody really knows.
Bubby, you make a really good point about these groups. Texas One Fund and these other groups that are now sort of on the crosshairs of the IRS, they applied to the IRS. They told, in general, they told the truth. Some of them seem to fudge a little bit on their numbers, but most of them told the truth to the IRS about what they were going to do. And the IRS, they have to affirmatively say, yes, you're a 501c3, you're tax exempt, you can come in. I should say that process is extremely lax. It's one of the things that all of us who deal with the IRS on our personal taxes would be surprised by, but their regulation of nonprofits is extremely lax. I wrote a story last year about a guy basically who ran the dumbest scam possible. He just claimed to be the United Way of a whole bunch of different cities, and like all from one mailbox in Staten Island. Like he would send in applications to the IRS saying, I'm the United Way of Austin and Dallas and Minneapolis and Los Angeles, all from a PO box in Staten Island. And the IRS let him do that. Oh, he also claimed to be the American Heart Association of those places. Anyway, so the IRS let these groups in. And so if you're Texas One Fund, that's what you say is like, hey, you told us this was okay. And I have the letter you gave me saying it's okay. So that's right. The IRS would have to come back to them and say, hey, we're going to audit you and see if you are, we put out a memo in May of 2023 saying this is what a tax exempt collective ought to be. After you were already approved, we're going to audit you to see if you're in compliance with that. That process would take a long time, and it's not guaranteed. They don't have a lot of people, so it would take a while for them to get to everybody. So it's not something where they have to fear getting shut down now. But if you think this is a long-term business, it's going to be a problem in the long term, 3 or 4 years down the road.
Got it. I also took one other thing. You said the downside risks. One of the things I've talked to college coaches around the country, not just Texas, but around the country. I've been doing this for 30 years, so I've got some background, kind of like you do. The one thing that they say that is a downside is they have guys that represent themselves as agents of these players who, I mean, look, some of them are 22 years old and were in college last year.
Yeah.
And they probably had a sociology class with the guy they're representing, right? And they say that it's just a kludge because there's no, like, we don't even know who we're really dealing with.
Right.
So if it's not the player or the player's parents, it's like crazy.
Totally.
Because they could do a Google search on somebody and literally the guy shows up at a kegger the night before, doing a kickstand at the KA house, and so they're like, what's going on here? That's another downside to me is player representation being unmodeled or unregulated.
You're absolutely right. And if you're a coach, I talked about the downside for players, that this is so unregulated and there's basically no rules. That's the downside for coaches. I mean, there's a lot of downsides for coaches. Their people can leave every year, and you have to deal with a third party that has the money that has to pay them. But you're right that there's no regulation of these agents, or there's very little, and there's no standardized contracts. All the things you would take for granted in a pro market. That the team represents themselves, the agents are registered, who everybody is, and everybody has a sort of a sense of responsibility to the system. Yeah, you're right. That doesn't exist because these agents, either they could be not really an agent, or they could not have a contract, or they could be, think about maybe they're not working in the player's best interest, right? What if you think this guy's out to screw the player? There's so little rules that you can kind of do whatever you want.
I had one guy tell me that they had 4 different people approach him saying that they were a person's agent.
Can you imagine?
So, I mean, that's the kind of chaos that an unregulated market can create. And these teams are having to, navigate that process, whether right or wrong. Speaking, how do you say your last name correctly, David? Because it's a little difficult.
Farenthold.
Okay. David Farenthold, Memorial High School graduate in the city of Houston, then went on to Harvard. But he says he's been a Longhorn fan forever. Both his parents went to UT. With the New York Times. We've had about a couple of hundred people join us. So I want to reintroduce you, David. Thank you for joining us today. CJ, Blake, you guys have any further questions for David?
I got one last question, David, for you. And my question is, where do you think this all ends up? Do you think we stay status quo, or do you think the model evolves? Do you think we eventually blow it up and do the NCAA proposal of the schools paying players? I mean, in your opinion, after everything you've seen, where are we at in 5 years from now?
If I had to guess, I would guess that it's the model somehow. I don't know if exactly what the NCAA proposed, but I would guess it's somehow that the schools are going to be paying the players. Just because there's so many moving parts in this system. There's the collectives have the money. We talked about the agents. There's so many sort of weird parts of this, and also we didn't talk about this, but one of the big concerns besides the IRS for the long-term health of the current system is whether people are going to continue donating. If you're say, for instance, you're a donor at Michigan State, right? Michigan State has this horrific season. Are you going to give next year, right? Is that donor base going to keep coming back year after year? So I do think we'll get to a situation where the schools pay the players. But then, the big question in all that is Title IX, right? If you're going to go to a situation where Texas wants to start paying football players directly, it's bound by Title IX to pay women's athletes or give them sort of equal opportunities. And so that raises the overall price tag of doing this to a level that only a few schools can do. But I think that's the only way it makes sense in the long term, is for it to go in-house at these schools. But then you set off all these divisions I talked about where it separates college sports into something that's pretty different, at least in high-level college football, than it is now.
Man, David, I've just got one last quick one, and thank you for joining, because this has been very insightful. I wanted to ask about financial literacy and kind of the approach some of these universities have taken to protect their kids, their student athletes. Have you found that most schools, I would hope, have something in place there to, kind of educate, not only their student athletes, but the families of the student athletes that are receiving what would be, pretty considerable lump sums of money to play and perform for said universities?
It really varies. I have to say Baylor does a really good job with this. Baylor has a good program teaching financial literacy. Other schools do it. But there's other places where it doesn't happen at all, and you see the consequences, right? There was just a lawsuit filed, I forget the school, where somebody, a player, signed an NIL contract that bound himself to pay some huge portion of his future NFL earnings to the people who were giving him. It wasn't with a collective; it was with some other entity. So basically, it was like a payday loan on his. So when he got to the NFL, he has this huge debt he has to pay, and obviously nobody would have signed that if they understood what they were signing. So I think you're right. That is something that some schools do, but given the amount of money and the sort of lack of standardization in this market, it's not like there's a standard NIL contract you can just get. Everybody's kind of making it up on their own. So it's even more important to be financially literate to understand, you can't take for granted that what you're being given is useful or good. It's something that schools don't do enough of, certainly.
Wow. Overall, do you think NIL is a good thing? I mean, the player, and here's my on this. Do the players deserve to be paid more than just a scholarship when it comes to major college football? That's the ultimate question for me.
No, that's what makes this story so interesting to me is the sort of the moral complexity of this. Like, yes, people seem to be breaking NCAA rules. Yes, maybe they're violating the IRS rules. Yes, there's so much, lack of transparency and confusion. But yeah, players are getting paid in a way that's commensurate with not commensurate, but it's closer to what the huge amount of money that they're making for other people. And I think you can't look at that and say that's unjust, or even practically we could put that genie back in the bottle, right? That there's some way to stop this, or to return to the days when players just got a scholarship and that was it.
David, thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. Good work on that stuff. Let us know if there's anything going on, and we appreciate your time, bud.
I will, man. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, David, hook 'em, buddy.
Thank you, Dave. That was awesome.
Have a good one. That's
David Farenthal, New York Times. I did put the link to his story in the chat for those that are interested. You can also find his podcast that we discussed on YouTube as well. Obviously, check it out after coffee and football. But
hey, I got a couple of news and notes I need to get to, Blake, that I didn't share in the open. Silas Bolden and Kendrick Blackshear both expected to come in this weekend. I'm told that Bolden, there was a question whether or not he would be a midterm guy or come in May. My understanding is that he would be a May grad and come in May for Texas. So not a midterm guy that's there for spring ball. We'll see if that all falls out. I had not heard exactly what would go on yet with Kendrick Blackshear, the linebacker out of Alabama, by way of Duncanville High School in that regard. And Texas still waiting on Jamari Caldwell, defensive lineman out of the University of Houston. C.J. Daniels, the wide receiver out of Liberty. Texas thinking that they're in good shape both places, but obviously Bo Davis's departure may throw a wrench in the plans of Jamari Caldwell. C.J. Daniels still looking at other schools or contemplating Texas versus Auburn. One thing I was told yesterday, there were 4 portal transfer receivers on an official visit at Auburn the same time as C.J. Daniels. Just keep that in mind. He's one of many for them, whereas Texas is kind of this is the difference between Texas and other places right now. It's not a throw spaghetti against the wall for Texas. All right. It's strategic, point by point. This guy fits, this guy doesn't. I mean, as of right now, Texas has visited 5 guys in the portal. 3 of them have committed to Texas. The other 2 are still uncommitted. So think of it that way. That's important to note for the Longhorns.
Wow. Hey, we've had while David was joining us, apparently some of the Bama insiders are now saying it's not going to be Lanning or Kiffin. As of last night, that's where they were thinking that was heading. So it's important to note that may not be either one of those fellas.
Well, we'll see. I mean, they may want somebody with more experience as a head coach. Lanning does not have much experience as a head coach. So you can think that. Kiffin, like I said, I think he went out the wrong way at Alabama, even though he's proven himself to be a valuable head coach at Ole Miss. Pat Shurmur's inclusion on that list is striking to me. That smells like if Nick Saban is going to hire somebody and Nick Saban is going to have a say, Pat Shurmur would be on that list. I'll just put it that way.
That one does smell a little funky looking at the rest of the list there.
Yeah, everybody else is a Mike Norvell or Steve Sarkisian or guys that have higher profiles. 24 hours ago, nobody was thinking Pat Shurmur. except for maybe a guy named Nick Saban. And if you're, I'll tell you what, Texas made a mistake back when they didn't let Darrell Royal decide his successor, in my opinion. That started getting the BBs all out of the box. Alabama would do worse than to allow Nick Saban to choose his successor.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way. He knows what's needed at that place.
And Shermer, by the way, with 21 seasons of NFL experience, with 11 of those being a head coach or offensive coordinator. So he knows the ins and outs.
No, he's a good football coach. He just didn't have a good situation in the pros. And like I said, he also was a good recruiter in college. I mean, he's got that's an interesting addition to the list of names. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
That smells, to CJ's point, that smells like Nick Saban's fingers are in this pie. And they should be, right? They should be in this.
Okay, y'all, we got time for questions, so please get your questions in. But, Bobby, before we get to those questions, I'm going to let folks out there know about Manscaped. And cheers to the new year from our friends at Manscaped, because your resolutions shouldn't be the only things that are well kept. 2024 is the time for new heights, new opportunities, and a new look for your Times Square balls. Manscaped's Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra is every man's cheat code to look good, feel good, and turn the page on confidence this year. Whether you're looking to maintain a trim or go for that clean-shaven look, this trimmer has you covered. It's trusted by over 10 million men worldwide, and now is your time to get a grip on your grooming with our exclusive offer. Just go to manscaped.com and use code ONTEXAS for 20% off plus free shipping. Happy New Year or Happy New Balls. And introducing the MVP of 2024, Manscaped's 5th generation lawnmower. It's not just a trimmer, it's your grooming sidekick. Equipped with 2 skin-safe blade heads, a standard one for taking a little off the top, and a new foil blade to go smooth wherever your heart desires. It's like having a personal stylist at your fingertips or, well, wherever you need it. And did I mention it's waterproof, fellas, because a trim in the shower is the only way to start the day. So get 20% off plus free shipping with the code ONTEXAS at manscaped.com, because nothing says Happy New Year like a deal that leaves your balls and your budget feeling refreshed. Embrace the new you and definitely embrace a new trimmer courtesy of Manscaped. Got the lawnmower right here, Bobby. Oh,
Nothing today, huh?
Nothing. I mean, no.
No, we've been doing those commercials for months now, and your reactions still always bring a smile to my face.
I can't believe. I mean, it is one of those things, man.
It's a staple. It's a staple of coffee and football now.
Yes, it is. Hey, one other thing I forgot to mention at the outset, CJ and Blake, Jahdae Barron has still not made a decision or an announcement. David Benda announced he's coming back 2 days ago now, or a day and a half ago. It feels like it's been a week since he announced, and it's probably been 24 hours, right? We're waiting on the decision of Jahdae Barron. Talking with Rod about that and UCJ, that could just be so crucial to the Texas back end and really allow them to focus so many of their efforts on finding guys up front in the portal. If Barron comes back, it just gives them so much versatility that it allows them to not worry as much and kind of laser focus on that front seven in the portal. You agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. If Barron does return, like you said, the versatility and opportunities for Texas to mix and match and plug and play, really 2 extremely experienced and veteran and productive defensive backs back there, it eases up the entire secondary in a sense that Texas doesn't necessarily have to worry about who's back there. Makuba and Jahdae Barron specifically in that secondary together, it helps that secondary. In my opinion, it will allow them to reach a ceiling in which we wouldn't have thought necessarily possible with the 2023 group as a result of their on-field production and experience prior as well as the experience or the versatility that you've mentioned to kind of move around in a number of different ways due to how they've been used throughout their career already.
All right, Joel, we have a super chat here from Steven Shell. And Steven says, Bobby, I'm 60 and I've been using Manscaped for 10 plus years. He probably has the lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, courtesy of Manscaped.
Promo code on Texas.
That's right.
Yeah.
20% off.
No, look, I don't know what to tell you other than not me. I don't know what else to say, guys.
We've had this question for the past couple of days. We just haven't had a chance to get to it. James Henson says, what's happening with offensive tackle Peyton Kirkland out of Florida? Have you heard anything there?
Yeah, he's been injured.
Yep.
He was injured the last half of the season, so he didn't get much didn't get many reps even in the Sugar Bowl practice, if at all. So that's been a problem for Peyton and his upkeep. I will say this. I mean, look, Jaden Chapman and Trevor Gooseby continue to be the two names that I hear most about the young offensive lineman, followed then by Connor Stroh and Andre Kojo. Kirkland's injury has put him behind in the weight room and elsewhere a little bit, but we'll see what happens in the spring. This is a big spring for all of those young offensive linemen. Each and every spring really is for those guys, because anything that interrupts your what I would call your growth or your development can put you behind a little bit. Cole Hudson's injury did that to him a little bit, right? He had to rehab from a shoulder. And so that put him a little bit behind DJ Campbell and Hayden Connor. And so being healthy and remaining healthy is a huge piece of that ongoing development that you want to see out of offensive linemen. You want to see that linear development with offensive linemen from their body and how much stronger they get.
Yeah, I think that injury is impacting the body with Kirkland specifically the most there. There was a lot of trimming and reshaping that needed to occur there as well. A foot injury makes things a little bit more difficult, and which is unfortunate because he did see some time, especially in the spring game with that second unit. Towards the end of spring last year, he was quick to get on campus, quick to adjust. It's not great in sense of continuing that momentum when you're stricken by a foot. So hopefully, this upcoming spring session will be one where you can start to see some steps taken back in the right direction for Peyton Kirkland.
All right, John, another question that I didn't get to yesterday that's been asked today is from Rob Hadaway. And he says, I know it might be too soon to know, but for planning a trip down to Austin, when will the team announce the date for the spring game? I Googled earlier. I couldn't find one. But, Bobby, do you have any insight on that?
My insight would be that I think it's going to be either April 13th or April 20th. That's my insight. And when does the reason I say that, it's right around tax day every year. It was right on, I think it was April 15th last year. And that those two windows kind of surround April 15th this year. The question I have is whether or not Sark does anything different based on the new NCAA portal open at a different time frame. Doesn't the portal open earlier this year in April instead of May 1, CJ? I think it does. And so does that mean Sark amps it up a week, or does he delay it a week? I don't know the answer. We'll have to see what he decides. But those are that mid-April time frame is what he's done the last 2 years.
We got a lot of questions specifically about Bo Davis and the vacant position. So let's take some of those. Ronnie says, do you expect Texas to have the defensive tackle situation solved by junior day?
I don't know.
It'd be nice if they did.
It would be nice if they did, but it's not. Look, Sark doesn't rush things, guys. It's not his MO. Now, if he knows Freddie Roach and he wants Freddie Roach, then I think that could get done quickly, right? If it's not Freddie Roach and it's somebody else and he wants to go through an interview process of people that he doesn't really know well, then it could take longer. Like, he doesn't know Frank Oakham and Rod Wright very well. we as fans do, or as former media members, whatever, around the team know those guys much better than Steve Sarkisian does. He's shook their hand probably once or twice. You know, he doesn't know that Rod Wright went to Hastings High School and Frank Oakham went to Lake Highlands. I mean, he hasn't experienced that level with those guys. Whereas with Freddie Roach, he's been in the building every day with him for a year. He knows who that guy is, right? So if you don't know who that guy is, I think it's a longer process to figure it out. I think that's the process that took him to Chris Jackson. He didn't know Chris Jackson that well, but over time he took it. So I don't know that there's going to be a quick turnaround. I guess we'll see.
Hey guys, got some new odds here on Sark being the Bama head coach, 35-1.
That's what they would classify as a long shot. So yes. For Texas's sake, I would take that as a pretty good sign. Obviously, a lot yet to go, and the early reports of Dan Lanning kind of teetering out right now. Maybe not necessarily the best news at the moment, but hey, a long way to go there. But for now, 35-1 is great in terms of Texas's chances at obviously keeping Steve Sarkisian.
Read back the odds overall of them all for Bama, Blake, if you would.
All righty, hang on here. Let me get these most updated ones real quick. All right, we got Dan Lanning as the clear-cut favorite. He's now negative 300. Lane Kiffin is plus 700, so 7-1. This is interesting. It just refreshed. And Sark's odds just went up to 8-1.
So I retract what I just said.
That was, I mean, like just now, it just went up to 8-1.
Who's that from? What company is that?
This is going to be from sportsbetting.ag.
All right, those are short now.
Yeah, so it was 35-1 as of this morning, and then within the past couple of minutes just went up to 8-1. As I said, Kiffin is 7-1, so they have Sark as the third favorite person to go. Mike Norvell is now 10-1. Kalen DeBoer 14-1. Kurt Signetti 14-1. Dabo is now 16-1. If you remember, Dabo this morning was the third favorite or second favorite. Bob Stoops, of all people, is 16-1. Pat Shermer, 20-1. Urban Meyer, 20-1. Billy Napier, 25-1. Derek Dooley, 25-1. D'Amico Ryans, 25-1. Sharon Moore, 30-1. Deion Sanders, 33-1. James Franklin, 33-1. Glenn Schumann, 33-1. And last but not least, Ryan Day, 40-1.
Wow, things heating up. But Dan Lanning's still the favorite according to them.
Dan Lanning. So basically, Dan Lanning is negative 300. Lane Kiffin plus 700. Sark plus 800.
Uh-oh. That seems like the three kind of flattening out there, guys. Should be an interesting 24, 48 hours. Tracking flights, etc. I'm sure that's going to happen. One thing I could say, Lanning, Lane Kiffin, and Steve Sarkisian, and Kalen DeBoer, they all share the same agent, Jimmy Sexton. So remember that. Jimmy Sexton's son, by the way, played golf at the University of Texas. I don't know if a lot of people know that or not, but his son was on the UT golf team. This is kind of movement that makes you a little concerned. We'll see what happens, though. Texas and Steve Sarkisian expected to work out a contract extension over the next couple of weeks. It was in the works as of the day after the Sugar Bowl. It was actually in the works prior to the Sugar Bowl, but they didn't want to talk about it or deal with it. We'll see what that means for the Longhorns going forward. You're
sorry about that, Bobby. I was refreshing those and trying to get some more from many other places to see if they agreed with those. So, all right, well, let's take some questions because now I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions regarding that. But let's talk about Bo Davis some more because we never got to finish with that. Rob Enfield says, did Bo Davis slow down his recruiting prior to going to LSU?
I don't know that he slowed down his recruiting. Bo's a professional. So let's talk about that. Jamari Caldwell situation gives me pause. And I'll say why. And, on Monday, he was on the cusp of committing to Texas. Okay. Tuesday, didn't really hear much. Wednesday, didn't really hear much. Wednesday afternoon, Bo Davis to LSU. So I'm not saying there's subterfuge here or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. But, for some reason, there was not as much communication there. Perhaps that was for Bo Davis to do his thing. So I don't know that he slowed down recruiting. They couldn't be on the road anyways, guys. So it's not like he stopped going to school visits or et cetera.
And then this next question here is a super chat, and it's from Edmund Lee. Thank you, Edmund. We appreciate it. He says, great effort and follow-up team on Texas football. This 2024 with all the recruitings and now the coaching carousels is tough to shift through the truth versus the rumors. Blake, any odds on which coach goes next? Keep up the excellent work. I'll have to look and see what they think may be the next domino to fall. I would say Jim Harbaugh would probably be the favorite on that in the collegiate ranks. Do y'all agree?
Like right now, they're not firing coaches. I guess they're at least in pro football, they're firing them right
now.
Right. That's the end of the season, yada, yada, yada. College football, they kind of made their bed. Like Billy Napier's not fired, right, at Florida. He's still got this football season, it looks like. He made through the rough patch. So college football, it'll be guys that are going from college football jobs to the pros. Or in this really unique situation with Nick Saban, a retirement, right? That's kind of out of the blue a little bit. That causes this kind of, I called it yesterday, it was an earthquake in college football because the amount of different things it affected could be just untold. You don't know. I mean, this is just one domino, and it's such a big time school that, there are going to be a lot of big time coaches that get approached about this. So we'll see how that goes.
Okay. And thank you again, Edmund, for the super chat. We really appreciate that. This next question here is from RJ Yarbrough. And RJ says, Bobby, does Bo leaving affect Collins coming back or the recent signees trying to leave?
So I've got notes out to Alex January's camp, DeAndre Robinson's camp, as well as Melvin Hill's. So those are the signees. We're waiting to hear from Brandon Brown, the 2025 commitment from O'Galley, Florida. And then we're also waiting. I don't think, however, and I have heard that it does not affect Alfred Collins' return. So don't worry about Alfred Collins is what I'm told. But the other guys, we're trying to get information right now. As of right now, we've got nothing on that. And we're going to wait for them to actually say something. And that seems fair to me. These young men have been put in a difficult situation, in my opinion.
Yes.
Definitely. Just a crazy.
Especially a week after he said he was staying and told people internally he's staying. Right? So there's a little bit of that going on.
And then this next question, guys, is going to be from Brian Hudson. And he says, we're talking about the Sark defensive line connections, but how much influence does Sark give PK to make the defensive line coach decision?
That could be a piece. That could be a piece of it too.
Certainly.
Absolutely. I just don't know I don't know how it would work, but that could be a piece of it as well.
And then talking about the linebacker coach, Croson ITA says, is the new coach already in Austin and working?
I don't know that he's in Austin. The coaches were actually out most of this week. So they took a little bit of because they didn't have anything going on internally. And the players don't get back until I think tomorrow or the 14th. So Sunday when they're set to return. The coaches actually took some time off, went and visited family, etc. And so most of the coaches were not in the office this week. They were off visiting family because they didn't have chance to really have a Christmas, right? And so I don't know if he was in Austin, but certainly on his way. The coaches were spread out, though, largely.
Hey, Bobby. Oh, go ahead, CJ. Sorry. Were you about to say
I was
something?
just going to say that first week on the job with the junior day as loaded as it is going to be a very quick welcome to Texas moment for Johnny Nance, in the sense of, you know, the recruiting intrigue and obviously impact that day will have for the 2025 class moving forward.
We've had a lot of questions about Ryan Williams. Obviously, Williams, the 5-star wide receiver that reclassified to 24 and was committed to Alabama. Then the Saban news dropped. Obviously, he decommitted a few minutes later, or about an hour, I guess, later. But lots of questions. Jeff C13 says, is there a front runner for Ryan Williams with Saban's retirement? But I'm going to follow that up, Bobby, with this one from Champ Bailey 3. Should Texas and Auburn be worried about A&M when it comes to the Ryan Williams recruitment? He's an early graduate. When does he have to make a decision?
He doesn't have to make a decision until he enrolls. So you actually don't have to sign a letter of intent on signing day. And a lot of these reclass guys don't do that for that particular reason, because it takes them longer to make a decision. They haven't really been thinking about it as much. What I would say, Blake, about this, and CJ, he is visiting Texas A&M this weekend. That's where Alabama's wide receivers coach, Holman Wiggins, just took the job there. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is he's still visiting Texas on the 27th. He's still visiting Auburn in the first week of February. So those are the teams that are really involved. Alabama right now, he may visit there depending on whether or not they have a head coach. I mean, that's kind of the dependency there. I'm being told that right now Texas and Auburn are the two teams to beat, given the loss not only of Nick Saban but also Holman Wiggins. Obviously, Texas A&M is going to try to cloudy that up this weekend. Interestingly, CJ, KJ Lacey, his high school teammate, is going to be playing in a 7-on-7 tournament in Austin, in the Austin area this weekend that you're going to be at. So you look all of that up, and we're still trying to figure it all out as well. But I do think the odds yesterday went up of Ryan Williams going to Texas. If you're looking for a silver lining about this, the odds probably went from 1-5 to maybe 2 or 3-5. So 40 to 60%, I would say, overnight.
Yeah, on the note of Ryan Williams, having spoken with him just a little bit down in Orlando last week, he made it pretty clear that he committed to Alabama for Nick Saban. While his relationship with Holman Wiggins, he said, was pretty good, I don't think that was the entire reason why he wanted to go to Alabama. As we've talked about with a number of these kids that commit to Nick Saban in Alabama, it's to play for the system and machine that was Alabama at the time. Like you said, it's going to be an Auburn-Texas decision here. This is prior to the visit to College Station, but I wouldn't say necessarily the idea of playing for Holman Wiggins was the overriding factor to commit to Alabama in the first place. And again, he was a big fan of Sarkisian, called him an offensive mastermind in the time that I talked to him. So that's something to watch there. But I do have to be a little cautious in the win there. He was very close to flipping to Auburn prior to that trip down to Orlando. I don't know if a lot has changed since then. Auburn certainly has 2 other 5-stars committed at the wide receiver position in the 2024 class. And like you said, Bobby, just hosted 4 portal transfer wide receivers last week as well. So they're very active right now, and I'm sure that's something that is in consideration for Ryan Williams and his camp when making these final visits.
Joe, this next question is from Jacob Smith. He says, how is it decided who recruits what players? Is it strictly position coach recruits that position, or do you have big guns, for lack of a better term, that recruit the top targets?
It's both.
Yep.
It's not just one or the other. For example, Jeff Banks has his fingers in a lot of big-time recruitments for the Longhorns. So even though he's the tight ends coach, he's helping recruit Colin Simmons, right? Now, obviously, Pete Kwiatkowski's the edge coach. He's recruiting him as well. But really, Steve Sarkisian's the one primary recruiter of a guy like Colin Simmons. So they do it a number of different ways. It's called an overlap recruiting strategy. It kind of got started when the recruiting process got accelerated from high school senior evaluation to high school junior and sophomore evaluation. Then you could take all of the top running backs and you would know about them before they even entered their senior year. So your running back coach could go see all of them, right? And then you also have your area recruiter oversee them. You have your head coach oversee it. It's an overlap strategy that started around 10 to 15 years ago.
And then we have a question here from Russ Swaim. And Russ says, it's going to be interesting to see who are the next great coaches. Who do you think are in that next wave?
I think we've been kind of listing them off, kind of frequently in terms of this Alabama search. I think Kalen DeBoer's in that conversation. Dan Lanning, I am very high on what he's been able to do so far at Oregon. Sarkisian going to his first college football playoff, appearance this year. It obviously points now to Kirby Smart having been that, incumbent to the throne, if you will. So it is kind of pointing to him as that next great 2 championships already under his belt, only 1 loss in the last 3 years. It looks like he's going to be that guy that everybody's going to be striving to take down and upseat. So those are some of the names that I see right now. There are plenty of others. I'm not sure, if you consider Mike Norvell to be a new coach, but he's certainly in that kind of position right now to be up against, the best of the best in the country every single year. So it's a new era of college football. And, there's a lot of ground and real estate for, Steve Sarkisian to go out and try and capture in terms of a national presence with Nick Saban no longer, man in the crimson and cream over in Alabama.
All right, guys, this next question from Dax Kelm. Bobby, we'll let you answer this one. He says, can players jump to the portal if a position coach leaves?
Not a position coach, but they can if a head coach. So Alabama's got 30 days to be in the portal. Alabama football players can transfer for the next 30 days in the portal.
Hey,
it's big. Head coach leaves. It's Katie bar the door in some of these places. If they really had an affinity for the head coach. I don't know if that's the case necessarily of all Alabama players, certainly a lot of them. My understanding was that Alabama and Nick Saban said, hey, take 24, 48 hours before you would start to think about what you want to do. And so I don't expect a mad dash to the portal for some Alabama players at this point. I think that's fool's gold. Now, once they name a new coach and or have a meeting with that coach, that's a different story.
I got to clear something up because I've seen this brought up a few times. And we had this conversation a week or 2 ago when we were talking about Trey Owens.
Yeah.
And Bobby, you made the comment, if Ewers got hurt, Arch would move to 1, Trey Owens, then y'all feel would be number 2 behind Arch in that case. I think a lot of people misheard y'all say that and took it as Arch would somehow jump to 3 and Trey Owens would jump to 2 and did completely miss the part if Ewers got hurt. Well, it's brought up in the chat now. It's been brought up a few times over the past week since that conversation has taken place. But what Bobby and CJ were saying was if Ewers got hurt, Arch would be 1 and then Trey would be 2. Not Trey is going to be better and immediately jump Arch and he's going to be 2. The caveat in that was if Ewers got hurt. So I just want to clear that up because I've seen this happen a few times and it's happening right now in the chat. So I just thought it'd be better to clear that up real quick.
Gotcha. I think, we're about done here today, but I want to reiterate, waiting on Jamari Caldwell still. Do not have a good feeling for that one right now for Texas. University of Houston transfer. Waiting on CJ Daniels, the wide receiver. Silas Bolden and Kendrick Blackshear, the wide receiver out of Oregon State. and the linebacker out of Alabama, both expected to visit this weekend. Bolden is not a midterm guy for Texas. He'd be a summertime enrollee. And then we're also waiting on Jahdae Barron and his decision. So whether to stay or go, also waiting to hear from all these defensive linemen that Bo Davis recruited. And then the macro, those are all minor or micro discussions, right? They're all impactful to the University of Texas. The macro discussion is what's going on with Steve Sarkisian. You know, is he a candidate or not at Alabama? And that we cannot answer with any conclusiveness right now.
The odds have changed just a little bit for Dan Lanning. I think I said they were negative 200 a second ago. They brought down to negative 125. Everything else is the exact same. So it's going to be a interesting day. Lots of speculation, I'm sure, going to be going around. Of course, if anything's breaking happens, we'll have you covered right here on Texas Football. But Bobby, tell folks what they can.
Hey, wait, I got to say one more thing.
Yeah.
When Mac Brown was let go, Charlie Strong was the favorite in the Las Vegas odds to get the job at Texas. So to your point about Las Vegas odds having an idea of what's going on, what you talked about with Jimbo Fisher, the most likely to be fired first. Yeah. Las Vegas has an idea. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
They're not
they make money for a reason.
Yeah, they're not uninformed.
Okay, well, Bobby, tell folks what they can expect later today right here on Texas Football if nothing breaking.
Yeah, if nothing big break. Certainly Bob Shipley, Coach Bob Shipley, and Rod Babers get together. They're going to talk a little bit of football theory. I think they're going to tackle the secondary today because Jahdae Barron and his decision loom large on the Texas football team next year. That's going to be discussed. We're also going to be monitoring all of these other issues as of right now. We'll see what all happens, from here and what goes on as we go forward in this process. A lot of different pieces to the puzzle right now.
All right, Joel, we want to thank everybody for tuning in. Got to thank Rick Valvaro and Austin Underground, Manscaped as well. Special thanks to David Farenthold for joining us today right here on Coffee and Football. Be sure to go check out. Remember, I put his story link in the chat, and then go check out his podcast that he did on NIL Collectives. You can find it on YouTube. But for TJ Vogel and Bobby Burton, I'm Blake Monroe, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. If nothing happens, of course.
Yeah, keep your ears